On your board, ideally, you should have 8 or 9 rectangles drawn up. Now, I've got 9 because that was the simplest division I could, make my page go into. And I've done one little painting here, which I'll explain to you in a minute. Okay, when you have actually done that, the next job is to make a reasonable amount of dark brown. And I would like it to be sort of one of these, these sort of deep browns here. I have used burnt sienna, Prussian blue, and a little bit of vermilion to get a sort of what is the equivalent of a burnt umber. So that if you want to write this down, it's on the edge of your board. It's burnt sienna, Prussian blue, and a very small amount of vermilion. That's the orangey red. Will give you a nice general brown, and the equivalent in a tube is something called burnt umber. Nice thing to do though, if you want to do this over the holidays. I mean, I've used at the top raw sienna and ultramarine blue and made a range of browns that way. And then I use vermilion and ultramarine blue and raw sienna. So it's really the colours you've got, but it's with the earth colours, raw sienna and burnt sienna. The earth colours do give you some wonderful colours.
Yes.
And yellow ochre. I've got one with yellow ochre here. Right, Sally, if you want to, and anybody else that's ready, you've got your dark brown mix. Could you also mix up a sort of bluey grey colour that you might use to do a sky, sort of like the sky today? And I'd make it stronger rather than weaker, because you can always, weaken it by adding more water or make it more pale, but it's harder to work the other way. So
what colours would you use?
Well, I think I would use this Prussian blue and burnt sienna again, but maybe a bit more blue than, very little burnt sienna, a tiny touch of burnt sienna, or you could use ultramarine. But what you wanted to do is look more grey blue than you don't want it going brown.
Okay.
With this brown, I'm mixing my brown at the moment. So I started with burnt sienna. I've made up quite a strong mixture. So it's not relatively little water, but quite strong pigment. And then I'm going to add the Prussian blue to it and see what I get. It goes into a nice brown quite quickly. You almost don't need burnt sienna with it. I mean, sorry, vermilion with it. You could almost just do it with those two colours. When you've done the brown, would you then mix a sky colour in the well next to it? So something that's like the sky today, which is a sort of grey blue. And for that, you can use the ultramarine if you want to, rather than the Prussian blue. But I would use some raw sienna in that as well. I mean, burnt sienna, sorry. And this one should have more, proportionally more blue in it. That will make it go more grey. Okay, this is the grey. And this is the brown. So this is purely Prussian blue and burnt sienna.
Mine definitely comes out as a green.
Put a bit of vermilion in it.
Yeah. They're Schminker colours.
Yeah, mine are as well. It does depend on the particular burnt sienna you're using as well. That can affect it. But anyway, if add a bit of vermilion to it, it'll probably make it go more browny. And this bluey colour here is ultramarine. And burnt sienna as well. Of the colour, and of course when you layer these colours it will make them darker, so it looks pretty dark when it's wet, but of course they will dry a bit lighter. You a picture of this, and I hope some of you have been able to print it off. Basically it's 13 centimeters high and it's 18 centimeters wide. So on your second piece of paper, could you have that rectangle ready? So 13 centimeters high and 18 centimeters wide. Back in one of our sessions, perhaps we'll start with this one. We did, do you remember we mixed Prussian blue and burnt sienna, and we combined the two in a strip. So we actually mixed up this burnt sienna and we added the Prussian blue to it to see what the mixtures of these two colours, which are complementary to one another, would actually create. And you get these sort of nice, lovely colours in between. We also practiced doing circles on top of other circles. So we looked at what Prussian blue looked like when you lay it over burnt sienna, and the third colour that's created where the two colours overlap. And it does depend on which colour you put on top and which colour you put underneath as to what happens. These were some more exercises doing the same sort of thing. I'm only mentioning this because in the feedback I gave Yvonne on her Christmas card, I mentioned about, you know, building colour up. And you can often get these wonderful dark colours just by simply overlaying another colour on top of another colour. Can you see that? This one is a very good example, you know, where the burnt sienna has been overlaid on top of the Prussian blue. You get this amazingly lovely dark brown. Okay, so this is part of another class that we did, but it's worth mentioning, I think, today, because this is a bit of a revision class, what we're doing today, before we move on to the actual painting. The other thing that we did was a copy of Leslie Worth's pond painting, which I think, you know, some of the ladies in this class have done. And at the top, I kept a record of the colours that I had mixed and used for this painting. And what was interesting was his use of a very limited palette. In other words, he didn't use a whole big range of colours. It's, you know, when painting a pond like this, where it's essentially water and trees, you don't need masses of colour in order to capture the scene. And you can, by overlaying and mixing a very few colours, and in this case I think again it was probably a yellow ochre and raw sienna, burnt sienna, ultramarine and Prussian blue that I used to create these colours. So essentially four or five pigments, no more. Okay, so that was something we did last term or the term before, I can't quite remember. I think it was quite a while ago. Okay, so moving on to this big piece of paper here. I think before we do this one here, which is one of the pictures that I sent you in preparation for the painting, it will be worth just taking the two colours you've mixed and fusing them together. So the exercise of fusing two colours, which is this one here, wet into wet it's called, can create these wonderful additional colours. And I think in this little study here, I have done that, wet into wet. Can you see? So I think what we'll do is in this first, in the box, where it doesn't matter which box you start in, you can start whichever box you feel is appropriate for you. Maybe start with the blue. And I would just, you know, put a fair bit on your page like this. Then maybe take some water and just soften bits of it so you can see what the paler version of that is like. So by adding water, while it's still wet, you can get a lovely, that's already fusing. I don't know if you can see that. I'm sorry if I'm a bit in the light. And then I would then wash my brush and then take the brown and do a bit of the same with the brown. So put it on full strength on in one part. And then wash it. So you've just got water on your brush, and then just drag some of that colour across. Okay.
Lovely.
So that's sort of wet into wet.